Hey everyone, hope you had a Merry Christmas. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight. Vishal, Benjamin, it's great to see you folks again.
Hey Nick, how's it going?
Going great.
Hi,
Awesome.
Nitin.
Perfect. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, my name is Nitin Taram. I'm one of the curators of Open Atlas. So, Open Atlas is a 501c3 nonprofit. Our mission is to empower high skilled immigrants throughout their life journey in the US. So we support immigrants across admissions, jobs, housing, visas, and more. So this workshop series, it happens every week at the same time, and it's for O-1. And what we want to cover are the different criteria for the O-1, and no matter your background, how you can position yourself for success in those criteria. And the benefit of this workshop series is, we intend to keep this free forever. We're going to start bringing in different kinds of O1 recipients, attorneys as well. I happen to be an O1 and EB1A recipient. So anything that we share today, just want to give a disclaimer that it's not legal advice. It's just from my own personal experience and our experience as a team supporting applicants on their journeys. But overall, we just want to, this workshop series, our work really is to give each and every one of you hope, right? So no matter where you are in terms of your visa journey, you have agency. So you have the ability to take control and chart a path for yourself. And the one is just a work visa. It positions you very well for two green card pathways, the EB2 NIW and EB1A as well, that we'll be covering in a workshop down the road. So we have a very exciting topic today. I'll be doing a short presentation, opening it up for questions. Any of you who have questions during my presentation, please use the chat function. If the question has already been asked, please upvote that question so we can answer it first. And at the end of the presentation, I'll just open it up for general Q&A. Feel free to ask questions related to this specific topic or any other topic related to O1 that's on your mind. So without further ado, super excited to share this week's topic. It's going to be scholarly articles or the publishing criteria. A lot of people have many questions on this criteria, and we're here to dive deep into it. Just give me one moment to ask the community manager to give me permission to share. Akanksha, can you please make me co-host? Okay, awesome. Hope everyone can see my screen. Perfect. This topic, publishing specifically, a lot of people have misconceptions, or a lot of people, myself included, when I first learned about this criteria, ended up doing a bunch of work, applying efforts in a certain direction that wasn't helpful when it came time to put together our petition. But just to establish continuity, we, this is our third or so workshop. The previous workshops, we dove into the judging criteria and we dove into letters of recommendation. Today, we'll be talking about publishing and scholarly articles. And just to give you an understanding, these are the other topics that we have coming up. And our goal is to do one round of these, take feedback from the community, and perhaps adjust the agenda. But it's to kind of tackle the topic over and over again, bring in different perspectives, So for those of you who are hearing this information for the first time, and if you're from a field where there is not a lot of attention, like if you're from a non-STEM field, for example, this learning and the resources, the perspective we share is going to be helpful for you as well. So this is where we are. We're kind of midway to the O-1 roadmap. We'll be touching on a few other criteria in the next weeks, but today it's going to be publishing. So what's very important to understand is what counts as a scholarly article. And here's where people get confused. So in terms of what counts as scholarly article, number one, the article has to be related to your field. Number two, it has to be an original work. So you can't, of course, copy the work of others. But there is a lot of flexibility on what's considered an article. So here are some examples. It's not an exhaustive list. So, of course, journal articles, papers, I mean, most people associate a scholarly article with them. But surprisingly, trade journal articles are counted as well. Now, what's a trade journal article? So let's say you published and how to set up an Amazon EC2 instance. And for those of you in web development or in the software field, you know what I'm talking about. But you published it in CNET magazine. So it's a magazine that's very popular in technology. That actually is a trade journal article, and it can be counted under the authorship criteria. Conference proceedings can be counted as well. So even if your paper wasn't published, if you present it at a conference, the presentation, the poster, the abstract, that can be counted towards this criteria. Also, books and book chapters. So the entire book, of course, that kind of makes sense that would be considered authorship. But even if you're invited to author or contribute book chapters, that is evidence as well. Now, what makes it evidence? It's very important. I mean, more than anything, the key question to ask yourself is there an editorial process involved? If there's one question to ask to kind of even vet for yourself if something can be considered evidence under this criteria, is to ask the question, is there an editorial process involved? And if so, can we document it? Now, what do I mean by an editorial process? Typically in journals in academia, you have peer review. So there's a group of professionals from your same field, and they take your manuscript which was submitted or a draft which was submitted, and they give feedback. So they circulate it amongst themselves and they give feedback. And once you have adapted your manuscript to the necessary feedback, it's approved for publication. So that's called the peer review process. But that's not the only type of review, right? So many trade journals, for example, they have editorial boards. So there's a chief editor, associate editors. Sometimes they bring on adjunct editors, if you will, as well. And as long as there's an editorial process, we can count that article as evidence. Now, what if there's no documentation around it? So for many of these different outlets, you can go to their website. You can, I mean, even when you're going through the process, they would share a guide with you on what the publication process and the timelines look like. So if there isn't any, there is still one resort. So we can ask the editor or whoever runs the outlet for a letter of recommendation. And in that letter of recommendation, we can clearly outline the editorial process and be like, here's who's on the board, here's what our process looks like. We don't accept everything to publish. We emphasize quality, so on and so forth. And finally, it has to be relevant to your field. And by field here, the outlet you're publishing the article in, it has to be widely disseminated or read amongst your peers. So that's an important consideration as well. But I would say what you want to focus on, the single biggest filter, is just asking yourself the question, hey, is there an editorial process? And is there documentation? Can I show that this outlet has some kind of editorial process? Now, what are some examples of this? So I wanted to make this more of a practical workshop. So I'm going to go over 2 to 3 different fields and talk about very specific outlets that I myself have used and other people in our community have used for publishing. Now, coming to technical blogs, and I mentioned wasted efforts earlier, and this is where, unfortunately, a lot of people spend time for little benefit as they start self-publishing on Medium, right? So Medium, Substack, there's so many different forums now or Medium now, which allow you to self-publish. But what is the first question we have to ask ourselves? Is there an editorial process involved? So most kinds of self-published articles are simply not evidence. They cannot even be considered. However, there are blogs that are run on Medium and they have an editorial process. So here are some examples that I've shared, and these are counted as evidence. As long as we can show the editorial process, we can use it as evidence. Another creative way to do this is to actually publish it on your company blog. So if you're working at a company that does infrastructure or anything super technical that a set of the users or customers need help understanding, you can actually raise your arm and be like, hey, can I put together a guide, a how-to, a case study, white paper? There's a lot of different ways you can contribute. And companies really care about their reputation. So they're not just going to approve anything for publishing. So you can actually show that there's a very clear editorial process involved, even though it's your own company. So that's a creative way in which we can tackle technical blogs. But there are different kinds of ways to get up to speed on this criteria as well. And here too, open source. A lot of people spend a lot of time for little benefit. And what's important here is who is acknowledging your work. So what's the process your work is going through? And at the end of it, when it's pushed to production or when you're contributing to a library, is that process well documented? So with open source, that's the main gap that we see is with respect to documentation, but it can definitely be included as evidence as well. And where a lot of the folks here can get a head start is with conferences. You'd be surprised at the bar conferences have, because something I've realized is it ultimately comes down to a numbers game. So once you have a manuscript ready, if you just start reaching out to conferences, 10, 20, by the time you've reached out to the 30th conference, your manuscript is going to be accepted for review or even presentation. So yes, there are some super tier 1 industry level conferences, but you can actually look at IEEE conferences and other domain specific conferences too. But even within IEEE, so IEEE is a global institution and it's very decentralized. And what I mean by that is universities around the world apply for IEEE accreditation. So what this means is you oftentimes have tier 2, tier 3 universities. They could be, I mean, they are nationally renowned in their countries. At the same time, they're up and coming on the global stage with universities in Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, sometimes in Europe, South America, in India as well. But what this provides us as an opportunity is all of the papers that are accepted there, all of the presentations that are presented there, even if it's virtual, it still has to be up to IEEE standards. However, your competition is much lower. It gives you an edge in terms of applying for and being accepted and having that speaking opportunity. And finally, coming to industry outlets, one of the easiest outlets to, comparatively speaking, to get published to, actually two. One would be DZone. They accept external contributors very often, and others like HackerNoon as well. And the others are just way more selective. But these two, DZone and HackerNoon, I mean, I would recommend you try right away. Now, hopefully, this is, again, not an exhaustive list. You can do a very simple Perplexity, ChatGPT search, or Google search and come up with a dozen more outlets as well. I would have this rubric in mind when you're evaluating, hey, is this a worthy outlet for me to consider? You can actually ask us in the Slack channel too, so we can have an attorney also confirm whether this outlet would meet USCIS standards. I'm happy to offer my feedback too, but hopefully this gives you a good enough idea, good enough way to get started. But moving on to another sector altogether is finance. A lot of people from finance ask, is O-1 even a remote possibility for me? Because I see all of these opportunities that are present, but it's mainly for people in tech. So what hope do I have? So the key is, yes, net, one can argue that there are more opportunities present for people in technology. However, there are opportunities present for professionals in every field. So it really matters where you look for these opportunities. So with respect to finance, you want to look for outlets where professionals similar to you are learning and gaining information. So what are the different newsletters that they are subscribing to? And a lot of times, I mean, you could say that, hey, no one reads newsletters anymore. Everyone's on X. But a lot of times, many of the X creators, I mean, rightfully so, they're afraid of being deplatformed. So they have Substacks. So they actually do have newsletters. So it involves some investigation, but it should be easy to find in short order. So in terms of the specific outlets to look at, you can actually look at if you have been part of any certification, you can look at your own certification institute. They often have publishing arms. So it's a great opportunity for you to publish there. You can look at different newsletters, news outlets. You can also look at the Forbes Finance Council. So in order to become a council member, there is an application process. You do have to pay membership dues. So it's a few $1,000s a year. However, once you become part of the council, you get the opportunity to do contributor pieces, which are pushed on Forbes itself. So a very strong publishing opportunity in that way. And thinking out loud, Forbes has a Forbes Technology Council as well, but it's just way more competitive to get into. But the Finance Council, not a lot of people take up the Finance Council. So it's open even today, I'd say, for early to mid-career professionals. Now, what about regulations? I mean, if there's one thing finance is synonymous with is its rules and regulations. And that's something you can provide your perspective on as well, right? And in terms of the outlets too, what's important is how well distributed it is in your field. Again, each of these can have maybe 50,000, 100,000 readers a month. And it's nothing compared to like a CNN, which has like 100 million readers a month. But that doesn't matter. Like in your field, these are well known and established journals. And that's something USCIS takes into consideration. You can look at places where you can contribute your perspectives. So lots of journals, outlets have opinion sections. And catch some, if you catch a wave, a trend, or you just get some unique insight, these outlets will very much welcome it, right? And again, one idea that just came to mind is what happens in there's a lot of change going on with visa regulations, approvals, what have you, and how is that impacting global remittance flows, right? So I came across a small article yesterday which said that people from Honduras who are here, they are accelerating remittance because they are afraid of being deported. And that was a very small piece, but it's an opportunity to actually put together a much more well-researched article on. And I'm just thinking out loud here, right? And finally, white papers as well. So there are research portals that accept contributor pieces from emerging researchers, right? So that's something I would point out as well. And quickly covering a third field. And again, sometimes applicants in healthcare, they're like, hey, I see most opportunities in tech, not so much in healthcare. So let's go into it in a bit more detail. Something that you can do are case studies. So whether through your internship co-op here in the US or through any of your courses or through your work in your home country, you're involved in a clinical trial. Many times that documentation isn't well put together. So you can take that initiative, put together a case study and submit it for publication. And this is something that I did. The way I got my O-1 was being a founder of a medical device startup. And the way I kind of satisfied the authorship criteria was by publishing a case study. Then you can look at, broadly speaking, health tech outlets. And these outlets, the top three here, very easy to publish. So they're open to contributor pieces. Several of them have sections on their website. Otherwise, you can go to the contact us, the editor's information is there. You can reach out with your piece. And then we're coming to journals which much higher standard. So if you're already on the research track, these outlets are ones you're pretty familiar with, and they're well regarded by USCIS as well. And then if you're coming from the regulatory affairs side of things, you're like, hey, I've spent my time more in policy and more on the regulations themselves, then there are a bunch of outlets that are just tailored for you that you can publish articles in. So again, what I wanted to share here is the thought process, right? So publishing is one criteria that I truly believe anyone can qualify for. It does take work. I mean, you do have to ideally draft, publish the articles, but given time, 3 to 6 months, and especially a year, it can definitely be done. Now, what are some action steps? So something I realized is if I alone do the article, it's going to take me a ton of time, right? And interestingly, USCIS doesn't care. You could be the 14th author on a paper, but you can still get credit if it, and especially let's say it has 100 citations, right? So the weightage doesn't matter as much. And especially for an O-1, right? What matters is you put in the effort, and the paper was published. So I'd highly encourage to the people here and to the people listening to this, and if you're able to find people outside, it's to kind of start making yourself into publishing pods, right? Or small groups. You can brainstorm ideas together. What we could also do in our next workshop on the same topic, I can bring in a former professor who she helps high school, undergrad, master's students with the research process. So I can have her do a workshop on how to go about ideating, drafting, publishing a research article. So that would be the step to do, is brainstorming different ideas. It's very helpful if all of you come from the same field. Otherwise, you can find the best middle idea to work on. And then this is the tough part, right? Is what is a good article? What are the different sections? What's a template to follow? So we'll share some sample articles in the Talent Visas channel on Slack in the next week or so. I'll make sure to arrange a workshop with Purabi as well. So that way, all of you have some ideas and are able to get started. And more than anything, the forum, the channel, community is open for coordination. So please feel free to ask questions in our channel. We can create another channel if necessary. And our goal here, more than anything, is to see each and every one of you succeed. So I'll take a pause there. Oh man, there's been a bunch of questions and a bunch of folks who also joined. So welcome, everyone. Arpit asked, it's a great question. What about internal documents that aren't public facing? Infrastructure is something internal that devs would use. Would this count? So it depends on what the application, it's a great question. It depends on what the application is. And what I mean by that is, let's say you work at Amazon and 10,000 developers around the world rely on your internal documentation. That's something that can definitely be leveraged as evidence. But if it's in a much smaller company, it's harder to show that impact. Because for the publishing criteria, there are 2 to 3 main checks, right? One is there an editorial process involved? Number 2, is article being disseminated amongst your peers in the field? So an internal document, by its very nature, doesn't have as much dissemination. But again, it depends on how large of a company we are talking about, right? Microsoft, Amazon, even internal documentations, they tend to be broadcast around the world. So hope that answered your question. Vishal Chaurasia, he actually shared a very specific article. This is a great example. I really appreciate you sharing this, Vishal. So this is what is, I mean, let me just share my screen and pull this up. Yeah, please go ahead, Vishal.
Hey, Nikin. So thanks for reviewing my article. Just one follow-up question because I've been preparing for my O-1 visa, and so I've been hearing a lot of things like for specifically these medium-based publication, there seems to be a lot of pushback on it. So what's your take on that?
I mean, as far as an outlet goes, this is a very strong outlet. So you can very easily, any attorney would be able to easily establish authority of this outlet in terms of follower count and such.
Okay.
And who else has also contributed, right? So the background of the contributor. And if there's well documented selection process, then we can share that too. But from an article perspective, and hopefully there's a workaround and hopefully it resolves itself. The main challenge here, and again, this is something the attorney would zoom into instantly as well, is this. So, for any article to be accepted as evidence, it's very, very important that the full author's name be visible and a clear date be visible too. And here we just have a timestamp. We don't have a date. So sometimes this resolves itself. Like
Yeah,
if you
it
give it a day or
resolves.
two, then the
Yeah.
date would appear. But other blogs and outlets, that's not even possible, right? And unfortunately, then that limits it being used as evidence. So overall, you've kind of followed the right steps, as in it is on Medium. However, it's within Medium here is just a platform. So it's within an outlet that's very well regarded within the tech industry. So even in terms of an RFE, they might just push back on the prestige of this outlet. And what the attorney would recommend is to do that homework ahead of time, is collect as much evidence as you can.
Okay.
Look at, are there any significant people like Andrej Karpathy, for example, or anyone else who's very well known in the industry, who's also published in the same outlet. So you kind of have all of that ammo. The attorney may or may not choose to use it in the initial petition itself, but you can have that ammo, so to speak, with you in case you receive an RFE.
Okay. That clarifies a lot. Thanks, Nikhil.
Yeah, but this is great work. So hope this provides inspiration to a lot of people here. And not to speak on your behalf, Vishal, but I think a lot of people here would really benefit connecting with you and knowing how you went about doing this.
Sure, sure.
Um, if you're open to it, we'd love to have you on next week so you can cover this in 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, sure, sure. Not an issue.
Amazing. Thank you. Pooja asked, in terms of number, how many research papers, publications should one target for application? That's such a good question. When I applied, I had about 4 articles, and generally speaking, 4 to 6 is sufficient. And again, if you have 10 and if you're on track to have 10, no attorney is going to stop you. So they'll be like, sure, more power to you. Let's find the best ones to use in our application. But to summarize, I'd say around 6 articles is a good number. So I hope that answers your question. Vijay asked how to make sure your journal is not flagged by USCIS for being predatory or pay to publish. Is there an exhaustive list? That's a great question. I mean, a lot of people rely on BEALL, list. However, USCIS doesn't refer that, mainly because it's crowdsourced. So there's no authority that maintains that list. And if, unfortunately, for whatever reason, your journal's name was uploaded there, even though you're a legitimate journal, now it's the responsibilities on your shoulder to take it off, right? And because of that reason, USCIS doesn't consider that an authoritative source. And pay to play also, it's very hard to provide a perspective on, right? Because most journals, yes, they run as nonprofits. However, if they have staff like an editor, a team working full time, then there are going to be what's called APCs or article processing charges. And that's completely normal. So you go to any tier one Scopus Index journal, it costs anywhere from $800 to $1,500 once your article is accepted for publication for it to be successfully published. And most people don't see that because that's funded through a grant. So when professors or PhD students are publishing articles, they use the grant funding or the university funding for that. But if you're doing it yourself, you'd have to pay that out of pocket. So which is where forming into groups is very helpful. You can more effectively just split the costs amongst the people that you're working with. So hope that provides perspective. But the one thing that I would kind of call out in a question is paying dues or fees to publish isn't necessarily bad. And there is like no definitive list for what's a predatory journal. So moving on, Pooja asked, is there a preference that all these publications should be in the US? What about India-focused publication? That's a great question. Honestly, it depends on your field. So most fields are global. So healthcare, finance, tech, as we discussed. So publications anywhere count. That being said, US-focused ones generally have more prestige than Indian-focused ones. However, for the purposes of an O1, we're looking for around 6 articles. And for many of you, I mean, H1B season is coming up. You're probably having O1 as a backup. So I would just aim for the output, right? So yes, you want to select which outlets to publish, but whichever one you do get accepted, whether it's India, US, as long as it's good enough, then you should move ahead. And the reason I say that is the ultimate choice. You can just give it to the attorney. You can be like, hey, I have these 6 articles, I have these 9 articles. Now, based on the trends that you're seeing or the pushback that you're seeing, help me select which ones to include in my petition. So that's the way I would approach it. Oh, that's amazing, Benjamin. So I appreciate you being interested in publishing with others. Aquila asked for the O1, the citations on a paper matter. That is actually something we'll cover next week. So what matters for the publishing criteria is the fact that an article got published. So it went through an editorial process and it was published in an outlet that's relevant to your field. Citations is actually the impact of your work. So that falls under a different criteria, it falls under original contributions of major significance. And we'll be going into that in way more detail in next week's workshop. But there's an important clarification point. Same thing with books too. So if you have published a book or contributed to a book chapter, you might be like, hey, are Amazon reviews important for it? Is the circulation count important for it? Yes, but not for the publishing criteria. They're important to show how it's impacted the field, which is a different criteria. Hope that answers your question. Yes. The workshop is recorded. Actually, we have the full playlist out on YouTube. So I'd recommend if any of you want to see the previous workshops on judging and letters of recommendation, I would direct you to our Open Atlas YouTube channel. So this will be uploaded in YouTube as well and a copy given to all registered attendees. Amazing. Thank you, Arpit, for raising your hands and taking the initiative. I'm just scrolling down, checking my DMs. Now I received a message in the DM. If my research was accepted, presented at a conference, and I received a certificate, does it still qualify as meaningful O1 evidence, even though it wasn't published? Yes, it does. So conference presentation definitely counts as evidence for the O1. If it is on track to be published, and depending upon the significance of the journal, an attorney sometimes might recommend, hey, let's wait let's wait till it's published. It might just be a month or two away because it would be much stronger evidence. So we can present a compelling story saying it was accepted, you presented the paper, and finally it was published as well. That being said, for the purposes of an O-1, especially if you're on a time crunch, then what you shared so far, which is you presented the paper at a conference, that in itself can be used as evidence. So it gets stronger when it's published, but it's not, it would be a nice to have. It's not a must have, as the way I would answer that. Awesome. I think I got to most of the questions. Then, if anyone has any other question, please feel free to raise your hand. I'll just unmute you and you can ask it directly. Maheshwari asked, are there any restrictions or is it okay to publish books on both H-1B and F-1 visa? That's a great question. I mean, most of the complications on any visa comes if you're earning income for your work. So here you're just contributing a scholarly article to the field. So it doesn't. I mean, we've had applicants working at Apple at some very restrictive companies, as in they're very restrictive with what the employees are allowed to do, even outside of work, using their own time and resources. And even they haven't had issues with publishing books. Vijay asked, do survey and review papers count, or should it be original research only? This is the reason I wanted to bring Purvi to do a workshop, because and this is such a good question. For those of you who are not familiar, there are different types of research papers, right? So typically when we think of a paper, we might assume that it's all one and the same, but that's not the case. So some papers are much easier to ideate, draft, and publish than other papers. And Vijay asked an amazing question that gives me an opportunity to clarify it. So there are two main different types of papers. One is a review paper, and another is an original research paper. And I'm drastically simplifying here. So a review paper, you're taking other people's research, that's work that's already been done, and you're summarizing what they have found, and maybe you're using it to support an argument, like a hypothesis you're making as well. So on a high level, that's what a review paper is. And what's the work that you're doing? You're just coming up with a question to ask. And then you're going through all of the existing literature, finding ones that support your hypothesis, then even finding ones that are against your hypothesis. And you could even add in your opinion, but you'd mention that, hey, this is our opinion or an extrapolation that we are doing based on the data that we are seeing. So a review paper, it's a great way to get started. And the other part of this question is, yes, it can be used as evidence for your O-1 and even EB-1A and IW green card petitions. So that's something I would highly recommend. So if you're new to publishing papers, then definitely get started with a review paper. Now, what's the difference with original research? Original research are the people in the labs. So they take 2 to 3 years. They also have a question in their mind. They have a hypothesis that they are testing. But for that, they are setting up a very comprehensive set of experiments. So they are generating data, and data that perhaps them and maybe 2, 3 lab mates or 2, 3 other labs in the world can even do. And this is tough work, right? So no matter which field you're in, if you think about the PhD students or the graduate students who are taking the research very seriously, postdocs, professors, this is mainly what they're doing, which is original research. So you may ask the question, hey, is it better if I do original research than review papers? Of course. So the quality of the evidence is way higher if you're doing original research. But the main challenge there is the time. So not just the time it takes to publish a paper, like most PhDs in their career might published 3 to 5 papers. They would have a lot more conference presentations, but I'm talking about top-notch journals. Again, it depends on the field. If you're talking about CS, the output is a lot more, but it takes time to do original research. And the second main limitation is they are gatekeepers. So most of this happens within, research in industry is pretty siloed. Like companies have R&D departments which are super secretive, very hard to externally collaborate. Academics, so universities, people in universities are more open to collaborating. But even then, lots of cold emailing, perhaps having a personal relationship with a professor, a PhD student. So there's more work to be done in order to get an opportunity to do original research. And this is where, if you're in school right now, if you're in any kind of university, undergrad, grad, PhD, you have an unfair advantage because all of these doors where original research is happening is open to you. People are willing to collaborate. So it's kind of up to you to take that initiative, go and shake a few hands, put yourself out there, and get opportunities to publish. So that's a longer answer, but I appreciate you asking that question, Vijay. So hopefully it helped the folks here understand the difference between review papers, original research, and what's easier to get started with. Awesome. Any other questions? Please feel free to raise your hands. Actually, let me ask one or two of the regulars because I've seen you for almost the past month. Vishal Mata.
Hey, Nikin.
Hey, Vishal.
Hey.
Any questions? There's no such thing as a stupid question, so please feel free to ask. I'm sure someone else here or quite a few people here might have that question too.
No, I think just taking it all in, I was interested in this idea of like a couple people coming together to write a paper. So let's say we have a common field, like let's say 3 or 4 of us want to write an AI paper similar to what the other Vishal shared with the agentic AI related stuff. So how would that kind of work in terms of like as long as our names are on the paper itself, that's all that really matters at the end of the day, right? It's not necessarily about who's like a lead author or anything like that.
That's correct. Yeah. So most people, when they form groups, they take turns, right? So they're like, hey, let's sign up for, if it's 3 people, let's sign up for 3 papers or 6 papers. So I'll be the lead author on 1 or 2, and then you just take turns. So that way, even though for USCIS it doesn't matter,
Hmm.
it's better team positioning and incentive alignment is we're
Sure.
all going to contribute, but each of us might just have unique strengths on certain topics. So we'll just take the lead with that specific topic.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I think this is just a little new for us because in other aspects of this whole USCIS, I feel like they're very specific on what your individual contributions are. So yeah, that's good to clarify. Thank you.
Thanks, Vishal. Yeah, please go ahead, Pooja.
Hi, Nikin. First of all, this is my first time for the session, and I just want to say super helpful information. My question is I'm in year 2 of my MBA program at Johns Hopkins, and if I have to start my O-1 visa journey, what timeline should I keep in mind for preparing my profile and then ultimately finishing the finishing the application and getting through it.
Thank you so much for making it here. I know it's winter break for many of you, so um, welcome. I mean, we'll be having these weekly, so feel free to any follow-up questions you have, feel free to bring it to our next workshop. And as I shared earlier, you're kind of in a very fertile environment to get started with developing your profile for the O-1. And even, I mean, it's just a coincidence that we covered this topic today. But in general, what I recommend to students is if there's one thing, like 80-20, there's literally one thing to focus your time on while you're in school and busy with a lot of other work and activities, would be publishing. Is you just have an unfair advantage given the ecosystem and the environment you're in. But the key here is to do work with an outcome in mind. So I was a research assistant, a program manager for 2 to 3 labs on campus. I went to Northeastern. But the mistake I did is I did research for research sake. And unfortunately, I mean, any grad school, I came here for undergrad, any grad school would count that, right? Is, hey, you have a very good letter of recommendation, amazing. But unfortunately, USCIS doesn't care. So what they care about are the results and outcomes. So even when you're talking to a professor, a PhD student, a postdoc, you want to be very clear that, hey, I want to publish a paper. When are you on track to publish? You can even look at labs with very strong publishing records, even before reaching out and having a conversation. And being in a university, I would just walk in, right? Yes, try to be polite and schedule an appointment. Otherwise, just walk up to the door and knock and introduce yourself. So that's how I landed my RA positions back at university. But coming to the overall visa strategy, I'd say the best way to think about the O-1 is as a backup to an H-1B. And the reason I mention that is because if you're on an industry path, so you're like undergraduate, break into industry and continue on in that track, then for most people, the H1 is the best suited visa. You are still tied to your specialty occupation. However, you can switch jobs, get promoted, and once an employer files for your I-140, you get spousal work authorization as well, and you can renew the H-1B an unlimited number of times. So ideally, we don't want to do that. But that is what's the benefits of H1. Now, when it comes to the O1, yes, one of the main benefits is you don't have to pay yourself the prevailing wage. We'll be talking about high remuneration about a week or two from now. It's just one of the criteria. And a lot of early career professionals don't meet that criteria, and that's perfectly fine. So given the wage-based lottery that we are entering into, the O1 is a very good backup option. The other is there's no lottery. So there's no annual cap. It can be filed for, approved for any time of the year. And you have premium processing. So you know in 15 days, you can start as soon as you receive the approval notice. That being said, there is no spousal work authorization on the O1, and it's only for 3 years. So at the end of the 3 years, you'd have to apply for another O1. So for most industry professionals, an H1 is a much better path than an O1. And what do I mean by look at it as a backup? So even now, the H1 is still a lottery. So the demand for it is still going to outstrip the supply. And if you're on OPT STEM extension, you have a few attempts to get the H1. So instead of going to a day one CPT university, which a lot of people do, an O1 is a way better option. And also you might just decide that, hey, I don't even want to be on F1 OPT status anymore because we don't know, right? The administration might change the rules of OPT and the STEM extension. then the O1 again is a good backup plan to have. And those are the situations where, let's say we have the path that you're going to continue. You want to have a profile ready and to pull the trigger on the O1 if and when the time comes. That being said, any of the work that we're talking about today, publishing work or the work in the other criteria, nothing goes to waste, because if you're not using this evidence for the O1, you can actually use it for your merit-based green card pathways. So let's say your H1 gets selected, but the employer doesn't want to file for a green card application. You don't have to depend on them. So you can take control and file for an EB2 national interest waiver, NIW. And what we discuss now, we're going to discuss in our other workshops, we can use for the NIW application. And once we have a little bit more time in our career, have some wins under our belt, then we can upgrade to the EB1A, right? So that's the fastest moving green card criteria. So I'll take a pause there. Hope that provided some perspective on where the O1 fits in career-wise.
Absolutely, absolutely. I even asked my friends from the MBA program to join this session, and we all are just like really helpful for such in-depth explanation and showcasing the entire ecosystem of how it works. So super helpful. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you making it. Your friends are most welcome to join us for the next session. And to the folks here, any other questions? Please feel free to raise your hands. Awesome. In case you have further questions, please feel free to ask them in our chat. Okay, just received one. Maheshwari asked, what is the path and how does it work from going from an O1 to a green card? That's such a great question. And in terms of, so what I personally did is I never entered into an H1B lottery. So I came to the US on an F1 visa, came from my undergrad degree. By the time I graduated, my physics professor, he didn't even let me interview at any large company. He convinced me to join his startup. And I was the founding engineer there. And we were building sensors. I was there for 2 years. Then I founded my own medical device startup. And it was through this path that I went from F1 to O1 to EB1A. The O1 is a work visa. So most people here are familiar with what I mean by that. The EB1A is a green card. So they are different, right? The US government calls everything a visa, but that perhaps doesn't explain these very well. So the EB1A, the EB2 NIW, both of these are merit-based green card pathways, and the O1 is a merit-based work visa. There are several other green cards and visas, but they are primarily controlled by the employer. The employer has to initiate it, pay for it, and holds that visa or green card, or they are family-based. So the ones that we have control over are primarily these three: O1, EB2 NIW, and EB1A. So the path from an O1 to an EP2 NIW is actually pretty straightforward. So most friends of mine, applicants I've known, they basically, update their letters of recommendation, change the attorney cover letter, and mail in the exact same petition that they did for the O1, and they get the EB2 NIW approved. So the NIW is pretty similar to the O1 in terms of difficulty. However, if you've built a strong enough profile for an O1, then you'd likely qualify for an NIW as well. Now, what do I mean by NIW? An NIW is a national interest waiver. So the US government basically wants to see what field are you working in? Are you well qualified to be in that field to execute on your mission statement? And is that field in the national interest of the US? So it is easier for some fields than the other. So people in healthcare and cybersecurity and certain other fields have an easier time. However, if you have done the O-1 work right, then you have already thought about how's my work related to the US national interest. So that's already some part of your O-1 petition, right? So we can translate that to the NIW as well. That being said, I mean, the NIW is still in the EB2 bucket. So you don't need an employer for it. However, the EB2 priority date right now is 2040. So we're talking about 10 plus years of waiting right now, which is why a lot of applicants, they first file for an NIW, and then they take a bit more time, strengthen their profile, and then upgrade to an EB1A. And the main upgrade here is for the timing, because the EB1 priority date is August of 2023. So it's about 2 years or so. And it actually moved ahead a year just 2 weeks ago. And people in the field are very optimistic now. So they expect more forward momentum for the EB1A. If any of you look up the EB1A criteria, it's actually the exact same criteria as O1. So criteria-wise, the NIW is a bit different, but difficulty-wise, it's the same as the O1. So, which is why many times applicants can use the O1 profile for an NIW, but the EB1 is a different animal altogether. So think of the O1 and EB1 as you have a building. It's on the same foundations, but an O1 building is 5 stories and an EB1 building is 15 stories. So everything we are discussing, and we will be discussing during our own workshops, qualitatively, quantitatively, the EB1 is 3 to 5 times that. So these are good questions to ask, whether it's publishing or the other criteria too, is how does it translate to an EB1 as well? Happy to cover that as we cover those additional topics. So to summarize the answer to your question, the O1, the EB2 NIW, the EB1A, all three of them are merit-based work visa and green card pathways. And once you have qualified for an O1, again, you could be qualified for it and not have applied for it, right? So once you're qualified for an O1, you have very likely qualified for an NIW as well. So that's a good option for you. But if your country of birth is from India, you do want to file the NIW, get the approval, lock in the priority date, and then take time and upgrade to EB1A because that sees the most forward momentum. And that's a good plan of action to get a green card in your hand in a few years' time. And you might ask, wait, why do I need to do the in-between step? Why don't I go directly from an O1 to EB1A? If that's something that you're thinking, more power to you. That's exactly what I did. But I'll also have to tell you that it took me 3 attempts to get my EB1A green card. So I had 4 RFEs. It took me 2.5 years to ultimately get my approval. And hopefully that doesn't discourage any of you because all of my lessons from that experience are what I'm sharing with you right now in each of these workshop series, right? So my hindsight is your foresight, and happy to accelerate that journey for each and every one of you. I just wanted to share perspective on what it takes to become EB1 ready. And our community is, of course, here as a resource. Yeah. we're a few minutes over time. And for any of you who have additional questions, please feel to ask it in our Slack channel. And you can direct the question to me. You can ask a general question. And our community manager, our attorney, myself, we're all there to help out and to answer questions. We'll be sharing this recording. I'll make it a point to upload the slides themselves in the Talent Visa channel too, so you can easily reference the different outlets that we covered today. So thanks to each and every one of you for making it tonight. So I was honestly scared a little bit on the attendance today, but it was so great having all of you join, and wishing all of you very happy holidays, a happy new year. And any questions you have, please feel free to continue the conversation in our Slack, and see you all next week.